Hi students. So in this video we're going to be talking a review about APUSH period 5, which goes from 1844, talking about the election of 1844 with James K. Polk, and goes all the way through 1877, which is going to be the end of Reconstruction. So there's a lot of information that really goes into period 5. And with 1844 specifically, what we're talking about is the election of 1844 with James K. Polk, in which he starts to bring about national attention to the Texas annexation discussion and argument. The Texans at this point have their independence. They are the Texas Republic, or also known as the Lone Star Republic, and they desperately want to become part of the United States. And over the course of time, this has been put down by a lot of presidential elections. But James K. Polk, who's a Democrat, really starts to promote this idea of expansionism. He's also the 5440 or fight individual, or at least presidential candidate. Will only run for one term, does everything that he says he's going to do, and then retires and goes out into the sunset. So a lot of these reasons why Polk is, trying to say this is because of this idea called manifest destiny. This idea that God has been telling the Americans that, they need to go out and settle west, and that there needs to be a continental United States. And a lot of people were going out west. There's a lot of things that are happening during the 1840s, like, the Oregon Trail that's helping, or at least helping people move out west. And then the California Gold Rush is really forcing a lot of individuals to move out to California. And you're going to see that California starts to boom, especially in the San Francisco area. But where we're really going to focus on with Polk in the very beginning is going to be trying to annex Texas and try to get more land. In fact, the way he does this is that Polk sends down American troops on the border and causes a border dispute in which the Mexican army will fire onto the Americans, and therefore now Polk can say, hey, look, they attacked us, let's go and fight, and voila, the Mexican-American War happens. Now, Zachary Taylor is going to make a name for himself during this war, very similar to how Andrew Jackson made a name for himself during the War of 1812, in which Zachary Taylor is going to be elected president. But what's really going to happen is that the United States and Zachary Taylor, they're going to win a lot of battles in which then the United States wins. And there's going to be the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is going to be created, in which the United States pays the Mexican government $15 million for the Mexican cession, which is a lot of states in the south, western part of the United States, New Mexico, Arizona, southern part of California. So the United States and James K. Polk, he does, get more land for the United States. Another thing is going to be the Gadsden Purchase. It's going to be the last time that the United States is going to purchase any land in what would be known as the mainland United States, and they built this just to create a railroad to kind of finish that all off. And while all these new land things are going to be happening in the 1860s, there's going to be land acts that are going to be passed. The Morrill Land Act is talking about, improving on the land that's already there through, or Morrill Land Act, is going to be the educational aspect of it. The Homestead Act is going to be how to improve the land. And then the Pacific Railway Act on giving land to railroads to have people go, out west. Now, while people are going out west, there is still Native American attacks that are going to be happening. In fact, there's going to be massacres, the Sand Creek Massacre. And then the Native Americans are going to, get the revenge with Little Bighorn. Okay, so there's still going to be dangers for individuals that are going out west. While in the east, you're going to see nativism is going to start to rise, and there's Know Nothing Party that is against immigrants coming into the United States for a lot of different purposes. Jobs, they think that, they are criminals. Specifically, these old immigrants, which we had already talked about, the Germans and the Irish, specifically these Irish immigrants that they're going to be very much against because, they considered Irish immigrants to be riffraff. Now, the thing is, the United States starts to open up trade with Japan in right around 1850, Commodore Matthew Perry opens up trade. So the United States starts to become one that wants to open things up and start to spread out. And eventually, what's going to be happening in a later period, specifically period 7, when we get to the period 7 video, is going to be American imperialism. This idea that the United States needs to go outside of the United States in order to expand. Now, where we really focus on period 5 is going to be leading up into the Civil War, this idea of sectionalism, the question over slavery itself. And sectionalism, as we described in an earlier period, an earlier video, is when different regions start to be more inclined to go with those individual, states or region over a specific issue rather than being overall Americans in this case. And a lot of it is going to bring tensions between the North and the South over the idea of slavery. Now, Harriet Beecher Stowe writes a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, in which increases this anti-slavery versus pro-slavery sentiment, especially since Harriet Beecher Stowe makes its slavery look inhumane, whereas in the South people are defending slavery as an economic reason to keep things going, and without slavery that the whole economy of the South would completely collapse. So in Congress, the Wilmot Proviso is presented. It's not going to pass, and what the proviso was to try to ban slavery in all the territories in the United States so that everything would be free. Now, obviously, the South is going to be against this because they realize as more states come in from these territories that they're going to be anti-slavery, and eventually then slavery would be voted out. So that kind of gets nixed, but this is just another one of these things that's kind of piling up on the South on why it's going to be anti-slavery. Zachary Taylor will eventually become president, and he is a Whig. And what Zachary Taylor kind of looks for in this, or at least with all this, is that he's really your last Whig president to be elected. Now, Millard Fillmore obviously is going to take over when Zachary Taylor dies, but your Whigs start to die out, and they try to make a Free Soil Party. And some of the Whigs will join this Free Soil Party, but the Free Soil Party will never get anything out of this. In fact, the Free Soils are not going to really gain any sort of traction until the Republican Party is formed by, 1856. During this whole 1850s, there's something called the Ostend Manifesto. And what the Ostend Manifesto was some Southerners were trying to get Cuba to become part of the United States, especially for the sugar plantations. And the United States the northern part of the United States is fearful that this would just expand slavery now throughout it. So the Ostend Proviso or Manifesto never actually works out. Now, the Compromise of 1850 comes in because California has boomed because of this gold rush, and they want to become a free state. And this is going to upset the balance of, free versus slave. So then like I said, there's going to be this Compromise of 1850 in which finally the North and the South agree on that California would become free in exchange for, and Washington, D.C. would ban the slave trade in exchange for a harsher fugitive slave law to be enacted. Other ideas was that New Mexico and Utah can vote on popular, or at least vote on through popular sovereignty, whether or not it's going to be slave or a free territory. And this idea of popular sovereignty started to pick up because that's where the Kansas-Nebraska Act comes in, where Stephen Douglas creates this Kansas-Nebraska territory in which he's going to have these free and slave voters vote on whether or not Kansas and Nebraska should be free or slave, which creates something called Bleeding Kansas, in which you start getting a lot of rebellious revolts. Murders are happening. John Brown's involved, and John Brown is going to be the guy that does the Harper's Ferry raid, in which he's going to be executed for committing treason for attacking a federal property. But Bleeding Kansas was that John Brown said that if you kill more free or pro-slavery people than they kill of us, it's going to be a victory because then they can't vote. So you can see how tensions are already starting to rise. they rise so much that even in Congress, you have Preston Brooks beat up Charles Sumner on the Congress floor over these ideas of, slavery. A major Supreme Court case is going to be heard during this. It's going to be Dred Scott versus Sanford. It's mostly known as just the Dred Scott case, in which Dred Scott was a slave and he was brought up into free territories for most of his life. So then when he goes to the Supreme Court and says, well, I should be a free man because in that time I was pretty much in a free territory or free state for most of my life and I should have freedom. Well, the Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger Taney pretty much said, why are you even here? Your property, you don't have any rights. So the Dred Scott case pretty much just kind of put down any chances at this point of civil rights or freedoms for slaves at this time. So at 1860, you're going to have a party realignment in which there's going to be a split in the Democratic Party. And the reason why there's a split in the Democratic Party, because 2 years before that, in 1858, there's going to be a Senate debate. In fact, there's going to be a bunch of debates between Abraham Lincoln, who's a Republican, and Stephen Douglas, the Democrat, in which a lot of people, a lot of Democrats don't view slavery the same way that Stephen Douglas was viewing slavery, so they start to split. And Abraham Lincoln becomes the benefactor of this split because there becomes three new candidates that are kind of all vying for these votes, in which then Abraham Lincoln then takes most of the free state votes, in which he only gets 42% of the vote, right around 42% of the vote. I believe it's actually 40% of the vote, and he becomes president of the United States. Now the thing is, at this time, James Buchanan, who's president of the United States, is a Democrat, does nothing at this point. And the reason why I'm saying is doing nothing is because South Carolina, a lot of the slave states had threatened that if Abraham Lincoln was elected president, he, or at least they, these slave states, will secede from the Union, meaning to leave. And they do that. South Carolina leaves by December, and by the time February rolls around, there's actually a confederation, or at least the Confederate States of America. And James Buchanan, all he said was, oh, well, this is bad. But he doesn't do anything about it, especially since he was going to be leaving office by March. So Abraham Lincoln is going to be inheriting this issue by March of 1861, when all of these states had already left the Union. So Lincoln now has to figure out a way to go into this Civil War looking favorably and not as the aggressor. So this is where Fort Sumter is going to be coming into play. Fort Sumter is in South Carolina. It's a Union base. So Abraham Lincoln refuses to remove his troops there, hoping that the South is going to actually attack them, in which they do. And when they attack him, this gives Lincoln the momentum and the motivation to gather up the North, say, look what this South is doing. We're just leaving them alone, these Confederate states, and now they attack us. We've got to go into there. And it makes Lincoln look like the victim in this case. Now, don't get me wrong, Lincoln is going to do some other things to make sure that everything is going well for him. Maryland is a slave state, and Washington, D.C. is on the border of Virginia and Maryland, so he invades Maryland, takes over Baltimore, suspends the writ of habeas corpus, which means that people can be arrested for any reason whatsoever. And a lot of people in the South and a lot of people in the North are like, I can't believe Lincoln is doing this. This is against the Constitution of the United States. He also institutes a draft, in which there's going to be draft riots up in New York City, especially since it's immigrants that are coming in, Irish immigrants that are being drafted into the military, and they have no idea, why they're even fighting into these things. And when we talk about the Civil War, there's a lot of battles that are going on, but the AP test never really focuses on a lot of these battles. But we can discuss that the South's survival, or the South's idea, was just survive long enough, while the North is saying we have to be the aggressors and take them over. In fact, this plan was called the Anaconda Plan. General Winfield Scott said we need to strangle the South to make sure that they won't have any more resources. Now, the things we got to keep in mind is that the North is much more prepared. They have more technology. They have more factories. They have more people. Where the South has just the passion to fight, and they do have more cotton. So that's about it for that aspect of it. But the South also has better military generals. A lot of the generals that were taught out, or yeah, they went to West Point, are going to be on the side of the South. So by 1862, it's kind of going either way. After the Battle of Antietam on September 17th, 1862, Lincoln proposes the Emancipation Proclamation, in which he frees all of the slaves in states that are in rebellion. He doesn't do it to any of the border states because he doesn't want them to flip sides on them. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. Now, there's going to be other battles. Obviously, Gettysburg is going to be a major battle, and Lincoln does his Gettysburg address addressing the United States on why they need to keep on fighting and that they're almost done. And it gets to a point where, you know what, the South loses and, you know, they rejoin, and there you go. Abraham Lincoln becomes the victor of the Civil War for a very short period of time before he's assassinated by John Wilkes Booth of April of 1865. When Lincoln is assassinated in 1865, Andrew Johnson, who was his vice president at the time, was also a Democrat, so different political parties from Tennessee, he was the only senator to not leave the Union when all the South succeeded. So they were trying to, you know, kind of throw him a bone a little bit. So Johnson is going to be leading this Reconstruction movement. Remember, he's a Southerner from Tennessee. So there's going to be a conflict between Johnson and Congress over the way Reconstruction should happen. And there was 3 Reconstruction plans. Lincoln's Reconstruction plan was to just forgive the South and let's just bring it all back in. Who really cares? Johnson's Reconstruction plan was to be harsh on the Southerners. But neither one of these presidential plans had anything in there on how they were going to treat African Americans or newly freedmen. That's where Congress was coming into play, where Congress actually had a plan, or at least somewhat of a better idea on what to do with these freedmen. And this is where your Reconstruction amendments come in. Your 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery, your 14th Amendment, which guarantees rights as citizens of the United States, and the 15th Amendment, which only grants voting to men. And this is where the women's movement will no longer join in with African American civil rights, because now they're like, but wait, now all men can vote, but what about women? How come women can't vote? So those Reconstruction amendments go in there to protect African Americans. The Reconstruction Act of 1867, which now sent military troops into 5 military districts down in the South to make sure that they were following all these amendments and all the new Reconstruction laws. The only state that did not have a military district was Tennessee. I wonder why. It's because Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee. Go figure. But don't worry, Johnson's going to be, kicked out pretty quickly, especially since he violates the Office of Tenure Act. Actually, it's the Tenure of Office Act. I always confuse that all the time, this Tenure of Office Act, in which then he's going to be thrown into an impeachment trial, and he's 1 vote short of actually being impeached. So Johnson then doesn't really do much after that. But, Grant is then going to take over, and we'll talk about Grant more when we get to period 6, because it's the Gilded Age. With a lot of his scandals, but Grant doesn't really do much in the way of helping things down for Reconstruction, especially since freedmen, the new way of doing things is now they go from slavery to sharecropping, and sharecropping just became a legalized form of slavery in which these freedmen start owing debts to the southern landowners that they used to work for, to a point where they can't afford anything or try to buy out any of their freedmen. They're also being terrorized by the KKK. There's new segregation laws called the Jim Crow laws that's going to be violating a lot of their rights. So keep that in mind, that things are not going to be good for freedmen in the South. In fact, some historians have agreed that Reconstruction and after Reconstruction was even worse than slavery when it came to terrorization and murder of African Americans. The Freedmen's Bureau was trying to help out African Americans with education, but that was even deemed to be somewhat of a failure, as it didn't get a lot of these African Americans on their feet. And where things really start to end, at least for Reconstruction, is going to be in 1876, when you have the election of 1876 between Samuel Tilden, who's a Democrat, and Rutherford B. Hayes, who's a Republican. Neither one, once again, very similar to what we talked about with other elections before, they don't have enough electoral votes to win. So there becomes a backdoor deal that kind of goes into this, and there's a special electoral committee that's trying to decide who's going to win. In this case, the Republicans strike a deal in which they say that they will remove all of the federal troops from these military districts from the South in exchange for Rutherford B. Hayes to become president of the United States. And the Democrats agree to this deal, and with that in mind, Reconstruction officially ends once this compromise of 1877 is agreed upon. The reason why Reconstruction is going to be ending at this point is like once they remove all of these federal troops out of the South, now the Southerners can do whatever they want. They don't have to follow any of these federal laws that were passed or any of these Reconstruction Acts. In fact, this is where the rise of your KKK is going to even take off a little bit more because there's no one there to protect these freedmen. So therefore, that's the main reasons why Reconstruction will end at this time of 1877. Well, that was pretty much a brief overview of Period 5, so I wanted to thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Please watch my other videos for AP US History. If you're taking AP Euro, I have a whole entire playlist for that as well. Other than that, keep on studying and make sure you get a 5 on that test. I'll see you next time.